Gloria Quinn stepped through the titanium-framed archway into the heart of the Galactic Warfare Academy's Strategic Simulation Hall. The room, massive and circular, resembled a command nexus lifted straight out of science fiction. Giant curved walls gleamed with embedded holoscreens, each displaying shifting star maps, fleet formations, and real-time data streams. Dozens of species were already present, some humanoid, others nothing of the sort. Gloria, a young cadet from Earth, was the only human in the chamber. She felt the gravity shift slightly under her boots, compensating for her lower mass compared to most of the alien attendees. Her cadet uniform, crisp and navy new with a single silver stripe, felt strangely out of place amid the embellished robes, carapace armor, and translucent suits of the other participants. She clutched the datapad under her arm more tightly than necessary. Her name had been added to the roster only a day before, and no one had explained why. She had been told this was an observational privilege, a chance for a junior cadet to witness one of the most advanced tactical simulations in the galaxy. And that was all she was expected to do: observe. Her Earth instructors had emphasized that part. No input, no questions, just watch and learn. The alien commanders paid her little attention as she entered. A tall Felorian officer, slender, fur-lined, and dressed in ceremonial white, glanced her way with polite disinterest. A Threxian war strategist, his face plated with organic bone, exhaled a low rumble as she passed. Neither made space at the central console. She found a side terminal meant for auxiliary observers and sat down, her fingers lightly brushing the cool metal surface. The simulation was set to replicate the Thalon conflict, a simulated interstellar war scenario lasting 40 years of in-game time. Two factions, the Varn Dominion and the United Otrax Confederacy, were pitted against each other in a relentless arms race, trade war, and planetary conquest cycle. The AI-generated leaders of both factions evolved their tactics based on the decisions of the cadets operating them. It was a benchmark test used by the Galactic Warfare Academy to evaluate how cadets performed in layered, long-form conflict resolution. The war, though simulated, had taken months of real-time preparation. Gloria glanced up at the primary holo-display. Virtual fleets blinked across a glowing starfield. Troop movements, supply lines, covert diplomacy, and espionage initiatives were already unfolding. She understood the interface, barely, but the velocity and density of information were staggering. Then she noticed something strange. Her personal terminal wasn't just a viewing panel. It had touch controls, a full HUD, and a small black button near the corner. Unlabeled, recessed, and faintly dusted over as though no one had touched it in a long time. It didn't blink or glow, it just sat there. She furrowed her brow. The button didn't match any of the documented controls from her training. She leaned closer. The surrounding metal showed faint scratches, almost like it had once been part of a prototype design. It was the only physical button on a panel otherwise made entirely of touch-sensitive glass. Gloria straightened as the lead commander, General Korvek of the Voltherian military caste, entered the chamber. He stood 7 feet tall, exoskeleton gleaming with red lacquered plates. His voice, when he spoke, echoed in a timbre deep enough to rattle her sternum. "Begin simulation," he declared. The lights dimmed. The simulation launched. The cadets took control of their respective factions. Diplomacy was initiated with minor border colonies. Starship production increased on both sides. Probes scanned unclaimed sectors. On her screen, Gloria watched it all unfold, completely ignored, completely invisible. She was used to that. Earth cadets were considered novelties. Her presence here was more symbolic than functional. But her eyes kept drifting back to the button. In the second hour of the session, one of the Otrax AI generals launched a stealth bombing run. Varn forces retaliated with a mining embargo. Then came a dozen cascading moves, complex chains of decisions, each contingent on the one before it. Gloria was impressed by the fluid logic of the simulation. Still, nothing broke the stalemate. She leaned toward the cadet nearest to her, a 3-armed Narvel with crystalline skin and glowing red pupils. "Excuse me," she said softly, "do you know what this button does?" The Narvel glanced at her without turning his head fully. "Do not touch anything." "I wasn't going to," she said. "You are an observer," he interrupted. "Observe." She sat back, flushing slightly. But the question remained, what did the button do? She tapped her fingers against her leg. Her instructors had always encouraged curiosity. No question is too small, one had said. Yet here, her role felt smaller than ever. She tried to ignore the button and return her focus to the evolving war, but the thought lingered like a tickle in the back of her brain. She lifted her eyes to the senior strategists watching from the upper mezzanine. None of them seemed concerned. Most were engrossed in the simulation. One elder, an Euraxian with bioluminescent mandibles, was sipping from a metallic flask. Another scrolled through metrics on his ARM console. Gloria's gaze drifted back to the button again. It looked so unassuming. One press couldn't possibly do anything permanent, could it? She stared at it. A button, unlabeled, built into a system so complex that no one noticed its presence. Why was it there? Why hadn't it been removed? Why hadn't anyone told her what it was for? Her curiosity was no longer passive. It was aching, breathing beneath her skin. She leaned forward. Her finger hovered just above it. And though her instincts pulled in one direction, obedience, invisibility, her mind pushed forward. One question, one touch. That's all it would take. But Gloria paused. Her breath slowed. The war simulation roared ahead around her. She closed her eyes. And then, just as her fingertip brushed the edge of the button, someone behind her cleared his throat. She snapped upright, heartbeat hammering. A Sarnak instructor, a tall, eel-skinned being with sharp yellow eyes, had entered the chamber. "You're Gloria Quinn, correct?" She nodded, flustered. "You were not cleared to interact with the terminal. Step away from the control zone," he said firmly. She stood at once flustered and ashamed, but as she backed away, her eyes caught the button one last time. A simple, silent thing. Waiting. She didn't press it. Not yet. But the question remained alive in her mind, like an ember waiting for oxygen. What did the button do? Gloria couldn't sleep that night. Even in the still silence of her assigned quarters, deep within the Academy's rotational habitat, where artificial gravity wrapped her like a soft pressure blanket, her mind continued orbiting one singular thought: the button. Her dreams were fractured and looping, filled with simulated starfields flicking out in sudden bursts, with alarm klaxons shrieking in silence, and her own voice echoing the same question over and over. What does it do? She woke well before the station's cycle lights activated, dressed, and left her quarters without breakfast. The corridor outside was nearly empty, her steps echoed in rhythmic taps on the alloy tile flooring. She knew she wasn't supposed to be near the strategic simulation hall outside authorized hours, but no part of her curiosity had dimmed. If anything, it had mutated into something more urgent, a need to understand what kind of system had been entrusted to her without explanation. She reached the entry checkpoint. The doors were sealed, and two Centrec drones hovered silently in standby mode, their lenses scanning for access credentials. She paused, debating whether to turn back, but then she noticed one of the auxiliary terminals on the wall, meant for maintenance schedules, was still active. Her fingers moved before her logic could argue. She accessed the Academy's simulation schematics, scrolling quickly, her eyes darting through security diagrams, server charts, and deployment logs until something unusual blinked on the corner of the screen. Protocol A4, Emergency Resolution Trigger, Access Level Red. She tapped it. A dialog box pulsed red. Unauthorized. She pulled back. But just beneath the locked icon was a brief descriptor, so short it almost didn't feel real. Reserved for human instinct override. Activates if simulation exceeds 18 escalation cycles without dominant resolution. Gloria stepped back, blinking. Human instinct override? She whispered the words under her breath. Had someone built a fallback into the simulation? Something triggered not by calculation, but by a human's unpredictable reflex? The idea defied the entire structure of the Academy's hierarchy. The Galactic Warfare Academy prided itself on layered strategy, cascading cause and effect, complex decision trees. It trained the finest tacticians of over 90 species. No one spoke of instinct here, only probability. But the descriptor sat there, undeniable, reserved for human instinct override. She left the console and returned to her dormitory without being seen, her chest tight with adrenaline. For the rest of the day, her classes felt distant. She barely registered the words of her xenopsychology professor. During weapons calibration practice, her hands moved automatically, her gaze unfocused. Even during a tactical seminar led by Commander Rulax himself, a rare and prestigious moment, her thoughts circled the same center. By the time the next session of the simulation began, her decision was already made. She arrived early and took her place again at the auxiliary terminal. The alien cadets returned one by one, tall, graceful, brooding, mechanical, fluid. None of them noticed her. She was an observational whisper, a symbol of inclusion. She welcomed their dismissal. It gave her space to act. As the lead instructor reactivated the simulation, the war resumed from where it had left off. Tensions between the Varn Dominion and the Otrax Confederacy had intensified into widespread planetary occupations. Dozens of simulated civilian colonies had been displaced. Economies collapsed. One of the simulated Otrax admirals began an illegal bioweapons program. The AI-controlled Varn intelligence sector discovered it and retaliated with a drone assassination of the enemy's planetary governor. The result was a chain reaction of vengeance protocols, triggering recursive invasions, then a massive energy blockade. The entire region of Zetalorn burned in proxy wars, and no one seemed to know how to stop it. Gloria's fingers hovered over the console. The war, though artificial, felt more real to her than ever. It wasn't just the holograms or the numbers. It was the fact that the commanders around her were adapting to it, feeding it, sustaining its cycle of conflict, because that was the only thing their training taught them to do: escalate, counter, dominate. And yet, no one considered simply breaking the loop. There was no button on their side, no invitation to do something irrational. Gloria felt her heart beat louder. She looked once more at the button, and she pressed it. She didn't pause, she didn't flinch. Her finger landed squarely on the black circle. The terminal beeped. Nothing exploded, no alarms blared. The interface around her blinked twice and then froze. She felt her pulse throb in her neck. The room stayed quiet, but across the chamber, the main holoscreen stuttered. Suddenly, the entire simulation stopped. The star maps dissolved. The faction dashboards disappeared. The projections of moving ships, intelligence packets, and planetary shifts all collapsed into a single expanding ring of white light. Confusion rippled through the cadets. General Korvek stood abruptly from his command seat. "What is happening?" he demanded. The simulation's voice interface spoke, monotone and cold. Emergency Resolution Protocol A4 initiated. Simulated war concluded. Victory achieved through override directive. "What override?" Commander Rulax barked. The room erupted. Some cadets stood, others searched their consoles. The system responded again. Protocol designed to simulate instinctive disruption, authorized for single-use deployment by human cadet. Conflict nullified in 4 seconds. Korvek turned his blazing crimson eyes toward Gloria. His voice dropped to a hiss. "What did you do?" She stood slowly, her voice steady despite the ice crawling up her spine. "I pressed the button." "Why?" "Because the simulation wasn't meant to end. You trained it to continue until someone forced it to stop. I didn't use strategy, I used instinct. That's what the override was for." The silence that followed was thunderous. General Korvek looked toward the upper mezzanine, where the high command had gathered without announcement. Elder Tiranov, a Yurixi counselor with translucent wings and webbed fingers, stepped forward. "Stand down," he said calmly. Korvek hesitated, then obeyed. Elder Tiranov turned to Gloria. "The button was installed 20 cycles ago. As an experiment. No human has ever activated it before. No human ever noticed." Gloria frowned. "Then why include it?" "Because we have studied your species," he said, "and we were not convinced instinct could produce logic. Today you reminded us that it can produce resolution." She exhaled, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in hours. The elder continued. "The simulation is over, but the implications are not. Dismissed for now. Further analysis will follow." As the cadets filed out, many shot her puzzled glances. A few looked uneasy, others openly resentful. She didn't care. She felt something inside her shift. Not pride, but clarity. The war had ended, not through force, but through interruption. She had broken the loop, and even if no one said it aloud, she knew that button had never been meant to be found. But she had found it. She had asked. She had acted, and that made all the difference. Gloria sat alone in the observation chamber, separated from the command tribunal by a transparent hexaglass barrier. The room was silent save for the faint thrum of the station's stabilizers, a low vibration she'd never noticed before, a subtle, constant reminder that even this place, so devoted to simulation and projection, existed in physical space, a place that could tremble, break, or be pushed out of orbit if the wrong pressure was applied. Just like her, she adjusted the collar of her academy uniform. It felt too tight now. Her rank insignia felt heavier. On the other side of the barrier, 9 seats were arranged in a crescent. 7 were already filled. Elder Tiranov sat at the center, his wings folded neatly along his spine. Commander Rulak stood to his left, his expression unreadable beneath the thin veil of his polished exomask. General Korvek sat stiffly, hands clasped over his knees, his crimson eyes locked on her through the barrier with surgical precision. A tone signaled the start of the session. "Begin proceedings," Tiranov said. A scribe drone floated down from above, aligning itself to record every moment in perfect fidelity. A soft golden light washed over the crescent. "This tribunal convenes to evaluate the unauthorized activation of Protocol A4 by Cadet Gloria Vance," Tiranov began, his voice steady, almost soothing. "The outcome, while operationally valid, raises concerns regarding chain of command, species-specific authority, and the ethical deployment of simulated extinction triggers." Gloria stayed silent. She knew better than to interrupt. Tiranov gestured toward the holodisplay embedded in the floor between them. A projection of the simulation flared to life, showing the moment she had touched the button. Every detail, her hesitation, her breath, the flicker in her eyes, was captured. The view shifted rapidly, collapsing systems, fading star fields, the recorded gasps from her fellow cadets. Then, stillness. "Cadet," Tiranov said, tilting his head slightly, "why did you believe you had the right to intervene?" Gloria cleared her throat. "I didn't believe I had the right," she answered. "I believed I had the responsibility." "Responsibility," General Korvek repeated, his voice sharp and metallic. "You refer to an artificial war. No lives were at risk." "That's not true," she said, her voice gaining edge. "Every cadet in that room was learning to solve problems by escalating them. Every victory required devastation. I didn't stop a war, I stopped a philosophy." Korvek scoffed. "You used a function built for emergencies. There was no emergency. The simulation was performing exactly as designed, but not as intended," she said. "If the intent was to train leaders, then the system failed. No one recognized the loop. No one challenged it. I did." Rulak shifted slightly but said nothing. Tiranov raised a hand, forestalling further argument. "We will not devolve into semantics," he said. "Let us consider the larger context. Why was this function placed in the system at all?" From behind the crescent, a voice answered. Admiral Nalis stepped forward, an aged member of the Old Guard, part of the Academy's design committee decades earlier. He walked slowly but with purpose, his eyes dim but not dulled. "I authorized the button," he said, 21 cycles ago." Korvek snapped his gaze toward him. "Without council approval? With silent consensus," Nalis replied. "We wanted to see what human instinct could detect that algorithmic refinement could not. The override was experimental, hidden deep, with no instructions. We assumed it would never be used." Tiranov nodded. "But it has now." "Yes," Nalis said, eyes now fixed on Gloria. "And not by accident." There was a moment of silence, a shift in the air, as though something sacred had been touched. Gloria did not break his gaze. Nalis gave a slight nod, almost imperceptible. Tiranov turned back toward her. "Tell us, then. Do you believe your action reflects how humanity would respond in real warfare? That instinct should override process?" Gloria shook her head. "No. I believe instinct should interrupt process when the process becomes blind. There's a difference. Machines follow momentum. Instinct recognizes when momentum becomes meaningless. I didn't end the simulation to win. I ended it because it forgot what winning meant." The words hung in the chamber, heavier than any silence that followed. Then Rulak stood. "I object to this lionization. Cadet Vance acted outside chain of command. The effect may have sparked philosophical interest, but the act was insubordination. If we reward her, what message do we send to other species? That impulse supersedes training?" Nalis stepped forward again. "No, Commander. The message is that systems built to simulate reality must also account for reality, and reality includes irrational choices with moral clarity. Tiranov let the conversation pause, allowing the weight to settle. Then he leaned forward slightly. This tribunal does not function to punish innovation nor to reward disruption without consequence. We exist to evaluate precedent, and in this case, the precedent is both singular and profound. He tapped the console in front of him. Protocol A4 will be reviewed and potentially retained as a permanent component of galactic simulations. Future cadets will be informed of its existence, but not its location or activation method. He turned to Gloria. You are suspended from simulations for 7 cycles. During that time, you will serve as a research assistant within the Academy's Ethics and Conflict Department. You will participate in debriefings with senior strategists from multiple species. Your insight is now part of our evolution. He paused. You may consider your action both a breach and a contribution. Balance them accordingly. Gloria inhaled deeply. Yes, Elder. The hearing adjourned. The lights dimmed slightly, the barrier lifted. As she walked out, Korvik passed her. His eyes narrowed, but he said nothing. She watched him go, and then turned in the opposite direction. Her steps were measured, not triumphant, but deliberate. She had not been celebrated, but she had not been broken, either. She had pressed a button that no one expected her to find. She had faced consequence, but also opened conversation. And now, for the first time since arriving at the Academy, she was no longer a background note. She had become a question that no one could ignore, and the galaxy was about to begin answering it. Gloria didn't speak for the first week of her reassignment. Not out of defiance, but because every word she wanted to say felt too heavy or too loud for the polished, silent halls of the Ethics and Conflict Department. Her new workspace was buried deep in the west wing of the Academy, a sharp contrast to the domed simulation chambers, the adrenaline-laced training fields, and the echo of constant alarms. Here there were no simulations, just theories and consequences. She arrived each morning before the corridor lights warmed to full brightness, and often left after the corridors dimmed to signal the change of cycle. Her desk was narrow, but the wall-sized console in front of her responded to voice, motion, and pulse. She'd been granted full access to classified simulations from the last 30 cycles. No one explained why she'd been trusted with that level of clearance. No one needed to. On the 8th cycle, she finally met the first member of her new circle. Professor Mael Griss, a retired Nilarian tactician, approached her station with the quiet efficiency of someone who had nothing left to prove. His lavender robes swished faintly with his movement, and his 6 fingers moved in deliberate synchronization as he deactivated his wrist seal. "You are Gloria," he said. She nodded and stood. He didn't return the gesture. Instead, he tapped the console and brought up a simulation. Battlefield echoes over a desert moon, with 2 fleets orbiting overhead. Ground forces moved in spirals, breaking and reforming under thick clouds of static jamming. Gloria recognized the layout, Sector 409 Beta, one of the oldest preserved simulations still used in entry-level instruction. "Tell me," Mael said, "where is the error?" She narrowed her eyes. "Error? The one that ended this war before it began." She studied the patterns for a full minute before speaking. Neither side accounted for gravitational resonance during artillery placement. The moment either side fired, the planet's magnetic crust would crack. The fight would be irrelevant. Mael blinked. And yet, the simulation continues for 48 minutes. Why? Because the purpose wasn't to avoid war. It was to test endurance in it. He folded his hands behind his back. "Then we teach cadets to run headfirst into unlivable outcomes." She nodded. "Good," he said. "Now prove it." That marked the beginning of her first assignment. Trace every instance of looped escalation within historical simulations and flag them for deconstruction. She worked in silence, filtering thousands of battle logs, communication streams, and AI narration lines. She saw decisions justified by metrics, not meaning. Victory defined by elimination, not resolution. Her second assignment came 2 cycles later. She was invited, without formal ceremony, to a private debriefing room where senior strategists from 4 different species sat in concentric rows, observing her as though she were both exhibit and experiment. Among them was a familiar face, Commander Rulax. He did not nod or greet her. He simply watched. The central console glowed with the insignia of the Feneran Guard, and a blurred hollow statue of a recent conflict hovered above the dais. "You are to review this battle and offer alternative closure," one of the strategists said, "one that preserves the core objective but prevents final phase annihilation." Gloria sat in the projection seat and allowed the data to stream around her. The battle was brutal. The original resolution required an orbital bomb to rupture the capital crust, ending the enemy's leadership and 900,000 civilian lives. The algorithm called it a clean end. She tilted her head. "How is that clean?" Rulak spoke for the first time. "The bomb ends the war. No counter-response, no future resistance. It prevents generational retaliation. But it leaves a vacuum," she replied, "an empty crater where rage festers. If your goal is time, then yes, you bought years. If your goal is peace, you've purchased the opposite." He narrowed his gaze. "And what would you do instead?" She rotated the simulation, enlarging a narrow valley 600 kilometers north of the capital. "Place an artificial standoff here. Deploy both sides' elite units, no civilians. Make it symbolic. Brutal, but recoverable. Give both sides a loss without the taste of erasure," one of the other strategists spoke. "And who ensures they abide by the limits?" "A third faction," she answered. "Neutral, present, with live feeds and hard triggers that halt escalation. Not a referee, an anchor." The room was silent. "You just described diplomacy under fire," Rulak said, almost amused. "I described pressure with a ceiling," she corrected. "That's what war is missing." The session ended without comment, but 2 days later, the Academy's bulletin listed a new elective: Hybrid Conflict Resolution, Simulations Beyond Termination. It was unsigned, but Gloria knew its origin. As weeks passed, she began to be visited by cadets, curious ones, usually alone, asking strange questions about ethics, about motives, about what counts as victory. She answered honestly, but never didactically. She had no interest in creating followers. She only wanted the questions to spread. Then, on the 23rd cycle, she received a summons. Not to a tribunal, not to a classroom, to the War Archive itself. The War Archive had no door. It opened only to those who'd triggered archival events, actions considered paradigm-altering. A place where past simulations were turned into fixed records, not for training, but for memory. She entered in silence, walking through halls lined with frozen moments. A Gerald commander collapsing during a siege. A human pilot stopping a fleet by colliding with her own carrier. A peace accord signed over a river made of fire. In the far chamber, a new display shimmered into place. Her, Gloria at the console, finger raised, button pressed. Above the image, 2 words shimmered. Inflection point. She stood before it for a long time. Professor Mayle arrived at her side without announcement. He said nothing, just looked. She finally spoke. "I didn't mean to start something permanent." "You didn't," he replied. "You interrupted permanence. And that's rarer." She turned to him. "Is that good?" He smiled. "It is necessary." She left the archive that evening with no destination in mind. Her schedule was clear, her title undefined. But her presence now existed in the currents of thought, in the murmur between species, in the revised codes of simulation design. She had not just pressed a button, she had opened a window. And though the stars outside still blinked with indifference, some now blinked with a hint of curiosity. Gloria stood at the edge of the orbital observation deck, the pale curve of HFY rising beneath her like a soft breath frozen in time. The Academy's atmosphere dome barely shimmered under the twin suns, but the glass beneath her fingertips was warm with filtered radiation. Below, 2 cadet formations were beginning a new simulation in the restructured conflict sphere, a chamber now retrofitted to include adjustable moral ceilings, non-lethal failure conditions, and mandatory human oversight. She hadn't expected this position. It wasn't formally granted, no medal had been pinned to her coat, but she was here, and no one questioned it. Every strategist, every senior tactician, every student who filed into her small classroom or filtered through her simulation modules referred to her reports, her protocols, her conditional parameters. They now had a term for the kind of solution she had become known for, an Gloria resolution. She hated the sound of it, but it was spreading, and she allowed it. That morning she received a sealed directive, a white packet embedded with organic circuits that only unfolded for living contact. Her fingerprint opened it, and a voice greeted her from a narrow slit in the surface. It was not a voice she recognized, but it bore the soft vocal distortions typical of the assembly's prime network. "A digital envoy, Gloria Miles," it began. "You are summoned to the First Thought Council for an unscripted engagement, purpose unknown, agenda variable, attendance non-optional." No coordinates were given, no transport instructions, just an iridescent symbol, 3 nested rings with a single dot at the center. She closed the packet, and the moment she blinked, the floor under her shoes shifted. The dome vanished, the gravity tilted, a pulse of disorientation ran through her body, and she reappeared in a chamber that did not exist on any map. It was spherical, its interior a living interface of organic light and thought-reactive texture. The walls pulsed in rhythm with breath, adjusting brightness with her tension. Across from her hovered a figure, neither male nor female, but enveloped in mirrored skin and draped in transparent data scrolls that constantly rewrote themselves. The figure was not alone. 5 others circled the sphere at varying heights, suspended as if by thought alone. "Gloria," the central figure said again. This voice was female, calm, unhurried. "You are here because your interruption caused a fluctuation in the strategic flow index across 76 interspecies simulations. 17 outcomes previously forecast as inevitable have diverged. 6 predicted wars have not begun. 1 war concluded in apology. The system does not yet understand you." Gloria stood still. "Do you?" The figure tilted her head. "We understand your effect. We do not understand your instinct." Another figure descended. A male, tall and skeletal with skin the color of dry bronze. His eyes were lidless. His mouth did not move when he spoke. "Your presence creates friction between expectation and innovation. The archive calls it anomalous compassion under untrained precision. We call it dangerous." Gloria didn't flinch. "And what would you like to do about it?" A third voice entered, aged and heavy, like old stars groaning. "Observe it, study it, determine if it is replicable or uniquely human." The female figure returned to the center. "You will not be punished, nor celebrated. You are now a variable. We will inject your model into higher-level scenarios, some real, some constructed. Your reactions will shape future thresholds." Gloria blinked. "And if I say no?" "No is not part of this geometry," the male voice answered. She turned slowly, absorbing the room, the floating minds, the way none of them moved, yet everything changed. "You want a pattern," she said, "but I don't have one. I ask questions. I press buttons. I act. There is no doctrine for that." "Yet," the woman said, "there may be." The room fell still. A narrow beam of light opened beneath Gloria's feet and slowly lifted her into darkness. When she opened her eyes again, she was back in the observation dome. No time had passed. The simulation below continued. The cadets hadn't noticed her absence. But the wall display had changed. Her clearance had been updated. Class Omega, strategic input, unrestricted. That evening, she left the academy grounds for the first time in weeks. She walked along the upper promenade, overlooking the city's radiant energy veins. Alien diplomats passed her, whispering in languages her translator barely kept up with. Some glanced at her and nodded, others avoided her gaze. But one young alien boy, half Koran, judging by his eyes, ran up to her with a wide smile and held up a tablet. "Are you the girl who ended the war with a button?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "Something like that. Can I learn it too?" She bent down and tapped his tablet. "Only if you ask why you want to." He frowned, trying to understand. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. Back at her quarters, she sat by the window, overlooking the upper levels of the spire. The stars beyond flickered as if responding to her thoughts. She didn't feel powerful or wise or even certain, but she felt present. And that, in the end, was her resolution. Not a battle won, not a protocol designed, but the choice to remain present in the moment when most systems tried to automate emotion out of existence. The universe would not always make room for people like her, but she had carved space not just for herself, but for the questioners, the button pressers, the ones who refused to wait for permission to change the outcome. The war had ended in 4 seconds, but the effect of that decision would echo for generations.